They said the billionaire fiancé had no heart. But the truth was far more terrifying because the quiet maid arrived. Someone inside that mansion was going to break, and no one would ever be the same. Again, the scream that echoed through the marble halls before dawn was not from fear, but from a memory that refused to stay buried, and the woman everyone feared stood alone in her silk robe, staring at her reflection as if she did not recognize the stranger looking back at her. She was powerful, untouchable, flawless. In every public appearance, her name carried influence, her presence commanded silence. Servants trembled when her heels touched the floor, and even the billionaire, who adored her, kept a careful distance from the invisible wall she built around herself. Rumors moved like shadows through the mansion corridors. They said she was cold because she loved money more than people. They said she had climbed her way into power with a heart made of stone, but no one knew about the locked drawer beside her bed. No one knew about the letters hidden beneath velvet lining. No one knew about the child she once was before the world taught, or how to survive. Then one morning, without announcement, without drama, the new maid arrived. She was small, quiet, almost invisible. Her uniform plain, her hair tied simply, her eyes lowered with humility. The head housekeeper barely looked at her before assigning duties: dust the library, clean the east wing, polish the silver. Do not speak unless spoken to, and never look directly at. Madam, the rules were clear. Everyone obeyed. Everyone except the new maid. Not in rebellion, not in disrespect, but in a way so gentle it almost felt like innocence. The first time she crossed paths with the fiancé was in the grand hallway, sunlight pouring through tall windows. A tray of crystal glasses trembling slightly in her hands as their shoulders nearly brushed. The tray tilted, a glass slipped, but before it shattered, the fiancé caught it effortlessly. Their fingers touched for one brief second, and something unexplainable passed between them. The maid whispered, "Thank you," in a voice so soft it felt like a memory, and the fiancé pulled her hand back as if burned. For the first time in years, someone had looked at her, not with fear, not with envy, but with something else, something warmer. The days that followed were subtle changes, almost invisible to the rest of the staff. Fresh white lilies appeared in the fiancé room, placed carefully beside her mirror. No one had ordered them yet. They were always her favorite, though she had never told anyone. A torn silk scarf she had thrown aside was mended perfectly and folded with care. A cup of chamomile tea waited outside her door during a storm, the exact way her mother once made it when thunder frightened her as a child. She stood frozen, staring at the steam rising from the cup. How could a maid know these things? How could a stranger reach into memories? She had locked away the staff, began whispering again, but this time about transformation. The fiancé voice softened when giving instructions. She no longer dismissed servants with a wave of her hand. She paused once, even asking the maid her name. The room went silent, waiting for the cold response, but it never came. The maid answered simply, and when she lifted her eyes, there was no challenge in them, only quiet strength that unsettled the powerful woman more than defiance ever could. Nights became restless. The fiancée found herself walking past the servants' quarters under the excuse of inspection, catching glimpses of the maid reading old worn books by dim light, sometimes humming a lullaby that made her chest ache with familiarity. One evening, curiosity overcame pride. She stepped inside. Without announcement, the maid stood quickly, startled but calm. "Why do you work here?" the fiancé asked her, tone sharp yet trembling slightly. "Because some debts are paid with service," the maid replied, and the words struck like lightning. What debt? What history? What connection? The billionaire noticed the change too. He watched his future wife linger by windows. Instead of commanding rooms, he saw her fingers trace the edge of a faded photograph he had never seen before, and for the first time he realized there were chapters of her life he knew nothing about. Then came the night. Everything shattered. A storm raged outside, winds howling against glass. The power flickered, and in the darkness, a crash echoed from the fiancé bedroom. The staff rushed in to find her on her knees beside the open drawer, letters scattered across the floor, tears streaming down a face that had never shown weakness in front of anyone. The maid stood at the doorway, frozen. The photograph lying between them revealed a small girl holding hands with another child, identical eyes, identical smiles, sisters separated by tragedy, by greed, by a family torn apart years ago. The maid stepped forward slowly, her voice breaking as she spoke the name only one person had ever called the fiancé in childhood. Silence fell heavy and suffocating. The powerful woman looked up, disbelief, horror, hope colliding within her. The quiet maid was not a stranger. She was the lost sister, presumed, gone, taken away during the chaos that shaped her into the Ice Queen. The world feared. The mansion walls seemed to close in as truth flooded every corner. Years of pain, of loneliness, of building armor to survive, melted in the space of a heartbeat. The billionaire watched, speechless, as the woman he intended to marry collapsed into the arms of the maid. No, into the arms of her sister. Sobbing not with weakness, but with released, decades of grief poured out, carried by apologies, by forgiveness, by memories neither had dared to revisit. The staff, who once trembled, now wept quietly, witnessing a miracle no wealth could purchase. The fiancée, who ruled with iron control, allowed herself to be human, fragile, imperfect, alive. The quiet maid had not come for revenge, not for money, but for reunion, for healing, for the chance to return what was lost. And in that stormlit room, surrounded by shattered pride and scattered letters, the mansion changed forever. Fear dissolved into warmth. Corridors once echoing with cold authority filled with softer footsteps. Laughter, hesitant at first, then real. The billionaire understood that love meant embracing the past, not controlling the present. And as dawn broke over the estate, sunlight touched two sisters standing side by side, no longer separated by silence, and the shocking truth that went viral beyond those gates was simple. The woman everyone feared was never heartless. She was only waiting for someone brave enough to remind her who she used to be. The morning after the storm, the mansion woke up to a silence that felt different. Not heavy, not fearful, but uncertain, as if the walls themselves were trying to understand what had happened the night before. The servants gathered in the kitchen, whispering in disbelief because they had seen their powerful madam collapse in tears, and no one inside that house had ever witnessed such a thing. The billionaire had not slept. He stood by the window of his private office, watching the sunrise, with a mind full of questions, because the woman he planned to marry had revealed a past he never knew existed. And the quiet maid, who had arrived like a shadow, was no longer just a maid. She was family, she was history, she was the missing piece of a broken life. Upstairs in the grand bedroom, the two sisters sat facing each other, the space between them filled with years of silence. The fiancée no longer carried the same cold expression. Her eyes were swollen from crying, yet softer than ever before. She studied the face of the girl she thought she had lost forever. Memories returned in fragments of laughter in a small garden of hands held tightly during thunder, of promises made under a shared blanket when the world outside felt cruel. A maid spoke slowly, telling the story of separation, of how greedy relatives divided everything after their parents died, of how one child was sent away quietly without explanation, while the other was groomed to inherit power and wealth. The fiancé listened with trembling hands, realizing that the empire she stood upon had been built on a foundation of injustice. She had been protected, educated, elevated, while her sister struggled in anonymity, working small jobs, surviving quietly, never revealing her identity because she wanted to see what kind of person her sister had become without influence, without advantage, without name. And when she saw the coldness, when she felt the distance, she did not approach with accusation. She approached with kindness, because she believed somewhere beneath the armor the sister she loved still existed. The billionaire entered the room, carefully, unsure if he was intruding, but what he witnessed changed him forever. The woman he admired for her strength now showed a different kind of strength. The courage to admit pain, the courage to accept truth. He realized that real power was not control, but vulnerability. And for the first time, he questioned whether he truly understood love. In the days that followed, transformation spread slowly, yet deeply. The fiancé called a meeting with the entire household staff, something she had never done. Before, they stood nervously expecting strict orders, but instead she thanked them. She apologized for her harshness, she acknowledged their humanity, and promised change. The shock on their faces was undeniable. Some even struggled to believe it was real. The sister remained quiet, standing beside her, not as a servant, but as equal presence. Rumors began spreading beyond the mansion gates. Business partners noticed a shift in tone. Meetings, once dominated by icy precision, now carried compassion. Decisions considered the well-being of workers, not just profit. Headlines whispered about the mysterious change in the billionaire future wife, but none knew the real story inside the mansion. Private conversations unfolded between the sisters. Late into the night, they revisited childhood dreams. One wanted to be a teacher, the other once wished to be an artist. Before responsibility reshaped her path, they laughed about silly fears, they cried over missed birthdays. They confronted the bitterness that had grown silently inside the fiancé heart. Bitterness born from loneliness, from believing she had been abandoned when in truth both had been victims of manipulation. One evening, tension returned unexpectedly. When an elderly relative arrived unannounced, the very person responsible for their separation. Years ago, his presence brought back the suffocating atmosphere of control. He attempted to dismiss the sister again, questioning her place inside the mansion, but this time the fiancée did not remain silent. She stood firmly in front of her sister, declaring the truth. In front of everyone, acknowledging the injustice, exposing the lies that had shaped her upbringing. The relative tried to defend himself, using wealth and authority as weapons. But the power dynamic had shifted. The woman they once controlled now held her own voice, and she chose justice over pride. She announced legal steps to correct inheritance wrongs to ensure her sister received what was stolen years ago. The staff watched in awe, witnessing not just reconciliation, but accountability. The billionaire supported her decision publicly, proving his loyalty was to her integrity, not merely her status. As legal processes began, emotional healing deepened. The sister confessed that she had feared rejection, that she had prepared herself to leave quietly if her presence caused harm, but instead she found restoration. The fiancé admitted that beneath her ambition was constant emptiness. No achievement ever silenced the ache of losing her only family, and now standing side by side, they began rebuilding not just relationship, but identity. The mansion atmosphere warmed, laughter echoed during dinners. Shared meals replaced isolated trays. Music returned to halls that once felt like museums of power. The transformation inspired even the most skeptical employees. Productivity increased not because of fear, but because of respect outside the estate walls. The story slowly surfaced through subtle leaks. Journalists speculated about philanthropic initiatives announced by the fiancé, foundations supporting orphan children programs, preventing family separations, scholarships in memory of parents lost too soon. Though no interview revealed the personal motivation behind these actions, those who lived inside the mansion understood the deeper truth. The greatest change was invisible. It lived in softer glances and hands reaching for each other during difficult conversations, in doors left open instead of closed. However, healing was not without struggle. There were nights when guilt overwhelmed the fiancé. She questioned whether she deserved forgiveness, whether years of unconscious privilege could ever be balanced. Her sister reminded her gently that blame belonged to those who manipulated, not to a child who simply survived. They learned together that forgiveness is not denial of pain, but release from its control. The billionaire observed their bond with admiration, yet also introspection. He realized that love demanded honesty about his own past fears, about the ways he, too, had used distance as protection. Inspired by their courage, he began repairing relationships within his own family, breaking patterns of emotional silence that had existed for generations. The ripple effect extended beyond the mansion. Employees reconnected with distant relatives, friends, reconciled old arguments. It seemed as If vulnerability had unlocked something contagious, something powerful, the house once ruled by intimidation now stood as proof that transformation is possible. When truth is faced directly one quiet afternoon, as sunlight filtered through tall windows, the sisters walked through the garden. Where white lilies bloomed once more, the same flowers that marked the beginning of change, they paused near the fountain, remembering childhood games, and in that moment the fiancée turned to her sister, expressing gratitude not just for returning, but for daring to approach her with kindness instead of resentment. The sister smiled, explaining that love does not knock. Loudly it arrives, quietly, patiently, waiting to be recognized, and as they embraced beneath the open sky, the mansion no longer symbolized power alone, it symbolized restoration. The shocking twist that had begun with a maid arrival evolved into a story of courage that redefined every life within those walls, and though challenges would continue as they always do, the foundation had shifted from fear to understanding, from isolation to connection, proving that even the most guarded hearts can open when faced with unconditional love. No one expected the final test to come so soon, because just when the mansion had begun to feel like a home again, the past returned with sharper claws. And this time was not only about two sisters, but about everything the billionaire had built. The legal battle against the corrupt relative moved faster than anticipated documents surfaced, proving manipulation of inheritance, forged signatures, hidden transfers of wealth, and as the truth prepared to go public, powerful enemies grew restless. Threats arrived quietly, first anonymous messages, subtle warnings to withdraw the case to protect reputation, to avoid scandal, but the fiancée, who once feared emotional exposure, no longer feared confrontation. She had already survived the loss of her sister. Once she would not lose her again to intimidation, the billionaire stood firmly beside her, offering legal teams security influence. Yet she surprised him by requesting something different: transparency. She insisted that the story be told openly, not as gossip, not as revenge, but as accountability. A press conference was arranged, and the media gathered, expecting corporate drama, but what unfolded was deeply human. She spoke calmly about childhood separation, about systems that prioritize money over family, about silence that protects the guilty. She did not mention names with hatred. She mentioned lessons with clarity. Her sister stood beside her, not hidden, not labeled as former maid, but introduced proudly as her equal. As co-heir, as partner in future philanthropic work, the world watched in shock. The image of the cold, untouchable socialite shattered, completely replaced by a woman brave enough to reveal vulnerability. Investors hesitated at first, markets reacted with uncertainty, yet something unexpected happened. Public support surged. People resonated with honesty. Charities praised her courage. Employees across their companies expressed renewed loyalty, because leadership rooted in truth inspired deeper trust. The corrupt relative attempted retaliation, releasing distorted narratives, but evidence outweighed manipulation. Legal authorities opened investigations, and slowly the network of exploitation unraveled. Assets were frozen, partnerships dissolved. Influence faded like mist under sunlight. Inside the mansion, tension mixed with hope. Security increased, yet fear no longer controlled the atmosphere. The sisters spent evenings planning foundations, spanning support for children displaced by greed, creating mentorship programs teaching that success without compassion is hollow. The billionaire observed how seamlessly they worked together. Different strengths united by shared history. He realized that the woman he loved was no longer defined by armor, but by authenticity, and it made him admire her more than ever. However, the deepest transformation occurred privately. One night, the fiancée entered the small room that had once belonged to the maid. She looked around at its simplicity: the narrow bed, the stack of worn books, the folded uniform, and she felt humbled by the contrast to her own luxurious suite. She understood now that character is not built by comfort, but by endurance. She asked her sister to move into the main wing, not as symbolic gesture, but as rightful belonging. And when the sister agreed, laughter echoed through corridors as rooms were Redesigned side-by-side memories replaced hierarchy, time passed, the court ruled in their favor, confirming equal inheritance, restoring stolen assets and formally condemning the manipulation that had separated them years ago. The verdict was more than legal victory, it was emotional closure. The relative faced consequences stripped of influence, and for the first time, the sisters felt the weight of injustice lift completely. The mansion hosted a gathering not of elites seeking status, but of community leaders, educators. Children, supported by their new programs, the once intimidating halls filled with genuine warmth. Music played freely, conversations flowed without fear. The staff no longer whispered nervously, they walked confidently, proud to be part of a household transformed. The billionaire raised a simple toast. Not to wealth, not to victory, but to family. To truth, to second chances, and as glasses lifted, the fiancée eyes met her sister in silent understanding. The journey from strangers to reunion, from coldness to compassion, had not been easy, but it had been necessary. Later that evening, as guests departed and stars illuminated the sky, the sisters stood on the balcony, overlooking gardens blooming brighter than ever. The fiancée admitted that for years she believed power meant never needing anyone. She confessed that loneliness had been her constant companion disguised as ambition. Her sister responded that survival had taught her patience, not bitterness, because somewhere deep inside she trusted that love would eventually guide them back together. They spoke about their parents, honoring their memory not with sorrow but with purpose, promising to build a legacy defined by unity rather than division. The billionaire joined them, wrapping his arms around both, understanding that he was not just marrying a woman, but becoming part of a restored family. In the months that followed, their initiatives expanded globally. Stories emerged of children reunited with siblings, of scholarships granted in honor of lost mothers, of safe homes built for those abandoned by greed. The media continued to follow their journey, but headlines shifted from scandal to inspiration. The narrative that once began with fear inside a mansion evolved into a movement beyond its gates, and perhaps the most shocking part of all was how simple it truly was. The change began not with wealth, not with power, but with a quiet act of kindness, a repaired scarf, a cup of tea, a bouquet of lilies placed gently beside a mirror, reminding a guarded heart of who she once was. On the anniversary of their reunion, the sisters planted a tree in the garden, symbolizing roots, rediscovered branches. Growing freely, they invited every staff member to place soil around it together, erasing the invisible lines that once divided rooms. As hands worked side by side, laughter rose naturally, and the mansion that once echoed with intimidation now pulsed with life. The fiancé looked around, absorbing the scene, understanding that true legacy is measured not in marble floors or crystal chandeliers, but in healed relationships and courageous honesty. As sunset painted the sky gold, she whispered, gratitude for the storm that had exposed hidden pain, because without that breaking, there would have been no rebuilding. Without that shocking arrival of a quiet maid, there would have been no awakening, and inside those once cold walls, every life had indeed changed forever, not by force, not by fear, but by the unstoppable strength of forgiveness and love.